The Forbidden Encounter. The red sky of Xeris hung low like a burning ceiling, casting a strange glow over the city's tall crystal towers. The streets were quiet but not peaceful. There was a tension in the air, like the world was holding its breath. In the center of the city stood the Grand Temple, a structure built from shimmering stones that hummed softly with hidden energy. No one dared to go near the ruins behind the temple. It was a sacred place, guarded for centuries, but on this night, the silence was broken. A patrol of alien soldiers discovered a hooded figure moving near the ruins. The figure walked slowly, as if searching for something. The guards surrounded him, their energy spears glowing in the dark. When they demanded to know his identity, the figure said nothing. He simply raised his head slightly, and for a brief second, his eyes caught the light of the red sky. They were not the eyes of any species known on Xeris. They were sharp, deep, and carried a strange weight. The soldiers hesitated, then dragged him toward the royal hall. Commander Liora was already waiting there. She was known for her quick mind and sharp senses. She had fought in border wars and negotiated with distant colonies. Nothing surprised her anymore, or so she believed. As the soldiers entered with the hooded figure, a strange smell drifted into the hall. It was faint at first. Like smoke carried from a faraway fire, Leora's body froze. Her heart began to pound without reason. Her instincts screamed. She had never smelled this before, but the stories of her grandmother came rushing back into her mind. She stepped forward slowly, ignoring the whispers of the soldiers. Her eyes locked onto the prisoner. She inhaled again, and this time the scent hit her fully. It was warm, raw, and ancient. It was a scent that did not belong to their world. Her hands began to shake. Her throat went dry. Her pupils widened. For a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. The soldiers didn't understand what was happening. One of them asked nervously if they should remove the prisoner's hood. Liora did not answer. She was staring at him like she had seen a ghost. Memories of old bedtime tales echoed in her mind. Stories of a race that once walked the stars beside their ancestors, a race that vanished after the Great Purge 200 years ago. Her grandmother used to whisper these stories late at night. Calling them the scent bearers, she finally whispered the words that made the entire hall fall silent. No, that scent belongs to humanity. The guards exchanged fearful glances. The air seemed to grow heavier. Even the energy lights dimmed slightly as if the room itself was reacting. Humanity was a word not spoken aloud anymore. It was a name erased from their history books. A name associated with both awe and terror. Liora slowly approached the prisoner. Her boots clicked against the smooth stone floor, echoing through the chamber. She reached out and removed his hood. The sight took her breath away. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with something she could not describe. There was no fear in his expression, only quiet strength. His features were unmistakably human. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if two worlds were facing each other after centuries of silence. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. The man's lips curled into the faintest hint of a smile. "A memory," he replied softly. His voice was deep and carried a strange warmth. It wasn't threatening, but it wasn't harmless either. It was like hearing an echo from a forgotten time. Liora stepped back slightly, trying to keep her composure. She signaled the guards to keep their weapons ready. "How did you get here?" she demanded. "Humans are gone." The man tilted his head, his eyes reflecting the red light. "Are we?" he asked calmly. Leora's breath caught in her throat. The way he said it sent a chill down her spine. The soldiers began to murmur in fear. Some stepped back. As if standing too close to him was dangerous, the council would need to be informed. But Liora knew that once this news spread, panic would follow. Humans were not just a part of their past. They were legends. And legends were not supposed to walk into your hall in the middle of the night. As the man was taken to the lower cells, Liora stood alone in the hall, staring at the place where he had stood. The scent still lingered in the air, wrapping around her thoughts. She clenched her fists. She had faced warlords, assassins, and alien generals, but none of them had made her hands tremble like this. Somewhere deep inside, she felt that this encounter was not a random event. It was a warning. the return of a story her people had tried to erase. Outside, the red sky of Xeris rumbled with distant thunder, as if the world itself had sensed that something ancient had returned. And far beneath the city, in the silent darkness of the prison, the last human sat calmly, watching the stars through a narrow window, like a man who had been waiting for this moment all his life. Whispers of the past. The night air of Xeris was heavy with unease, and the whispers began long before the sun rose over the red horizon. In the narrow streets between glowing crystal towers, merchants paused their late-night work to talk in low, fearful tones. Soldiers on patrol tightened their grips on their weapons. Their antennae twitched nervously as if the scent of something ancient lingered on the wind. The Royal Hall's guards tried to keep the news contained, but fear has its own wings, and by dawn, every corner of the city carried the same story. A human had been captured near the temple ruins. It was unthinkable, yet undeniable, because Commander Liora herself had spoken the forbidden word. Humanity, in the high chambers of the Council of Elders, thick with incense and the hum of ancient machines, the oldest minds of Xeris gathered in a circle. Their faces were wrinkled with centuries of duty, their eyes glowing faintly with bio-implants that recorded history far deeper than the public archives. The hall was sealed, protected by sound shields to prevent leaks. Elder Vren, whose voice had not trembled in decades, spoke with caution. If this news spreads uncontrolled, the people will panic. Elder Sira, who had once fought in the border conflicts, whispered back, "Panic is already here. We must decide what this means." They opened the old sealed records, files untouched since the Purge. Their screens flickered with images of humans walking among their ancestors, some smiling, some leading armies, and some burning cities with weapons that no one on Xeris had seen since. Meanwhile, Commander Liora stood on the balcony outside the council chamber. Staring down at the awakening city, she had not slept. The scent still haunted her mind. It wasn't just a smell, it was a memory she didn't own, passed down through blood and story. She remembered her grandmother's trembling hands as she used to speak of a man who smelled like smoke and steel, a human who once saved their settlement during the Dark Invasion. Her grandmother had sworn that if one ever returned, it would not be a coincidence. Liora pressed her palms against the cold railing, trying to control the storm inside her. She was trained to face enemies, to lead troops, to think logically. But nothing in her entire career had prepared her for a human standing quietly in her hall. She made her way down into the underground prison where the stranger was held. The tunnels were dimly lit, with moisture dripping from the ancient stone walls. Few guards dared to stay near his cell for long. Some said they could feel his presence like a pressure on their chest. Others claimed the scent made them remember things they had never lived. Liora dismissed the guards and stepped closer. Her boots echoed through the silence. The man was sitting cross-legged on the floor, looking through the narrow slit in the wall toward the distant stars. His hood was gone now, revealing his human features clearly under the pale light. There was no fear in his eyes, no sign of aggression, just a quiet focus, like someone who had waited centuries for something inevitable. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. He turned slowly to face her, his eyes meeting hers with a steady intensity that made her heart tighten. "Because the story isn't over," he said. His voice carried both strength and sorrow, and something else she couldn't name. "You've buried the past." "But the past hasn't buried you," Liora frowned. "Humans are gone, wiped out, history," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, they sounded fragile, like something she was trying to convince herself of. The man tilted his head slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "You think extinction is silence, but it's only silence for those who stopped listening." His words struck her like a cold wind. She had interrogated criminals, spies and warlords, but no one had spoken like this. There was weight behind every word, as if he carried the voices of 1,000 forgotten souls. She stepped closer to the bars, lowering her voice. "Who are you?" He looked back at the stars for a moment, then said, "Someone who remembers when your people and mine fought side by side. Someone who remembers what's coming." Her breath caught. "What's coming?" she asked, but he only smiled faintly and said nothing more. As she walked back through the prison tunnels, her mind was spinning. She didn't know whether to report everything to the council or keep some of it to herself. The city above her was already vibrating with tension, and if the council mishandled this, fear could turn into chaos overnight. For the first time in years, Commander Liora felt truly uncertain. She wasn't facing a political crisis or a military threat. She was facing a story that refused to stay buried, and deep down, something told her that this was only the beginning. The last human, the council chamber buzzed with quiet urgency as reports came in from every district. Patrol units had doubled their efforts, scanners had been activated across the city, and every historian still alive was summoned to decode the unthinkable. The elders stood around a holographic map that displayed the captured humans' genetic data. The results were clear, undeniable, and terrifying. There were no mutations, no hybrid markers, no alien DNA traces. It was pure, unaltered human lineage, a genetic signature that matched the ancient records perfectly. Elder Vren's voice trembled as he said, "It's him, not a clone, not a trick. A real one." The room fell silent, and even the machines seemed to hum more slowly. The question was not whether he was human, but how a human could still exist after 2 centuries of silence. While the council argued in secrecy, Commander Liora found herself unable to stay away from the underground chamber. Something about the man's calm presence pulled at her, as if he carried an invisible gravity. She entered the dimly lit cell once more, dismissing the guards who stood uneasily outside. The man sat against the wall, his arms resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the narrow slit that showed a fragment of the night sky. His stillness was not that of a prisoner waiting for judgment, but of someone who had already accepted his role in something larger. She crossed her arms, trying to keep her voice firm. "The council confirmed it. You are human," she said. He looked at her with quiet amusement. "You needed machines to tell you that," he replied. Liora frowned. "We needed proof, because humans are not supposed to exist anymore." He tilted his head and said, "Supposed to, yes. But truth doesn't follow rules written by frightened men." His words were soft, but they struck her like heavy stones. She took a slow breath and stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Where have you been all this time?" she asked. "How did you survive?" His expression shifted slightly, as if remembering something distant and painful. "We left," he said simply. "When the purge began, when your ancestors turned their fear into fire, some of us vanished into the dark, not because we were defeated, but because we remembered something they didn't." Liora felt a shiver run through her as he spoke. His words carried the weight of history her people had buried. "What did you remember?" she asked. He looked directly at her now, and for the first time, there was a spark in his eyes. "That the enemy you feared wasn't truly gone. Only sleeping," he said. "We waited where no one would follow. Building in silence, remembering in silence, preparing in silence." His voice grew heavier, like the sound of distant drums. "And when the time came, one of us would return to deliver the warning." Liora stared at him, trying to understand. "What warning?" she asked, but he shook his head slowly. "Not yet, Commander," he said. "You wouldn't believe it, not until the sky itself speaks." She felt frustration rise in her chest, but it was mixed with something else. Curiosity, even a strange respect. She had interrogated countless beings before, but none like him. He didn't fear her, he didn't resist. He simply spoke like someone who already knew how the story would unfold. The silence between them grew deep, almost uncomfortable until he spoke again. "Do you know what happens to a story when everyone pretends it never existed?" he asked. "It doesn't disappear, it waits." His gaze shifted back to the stars. "And I am that waiting." She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Her heart was pounding faster than she wanted to admit. The image of his calm face, the scent that carried through the air, the strange way he spoke, it all wrapped around her thoughts like an unshakable thread. She knew something was coming, something far beyond her rank and her training. Meanwhile, deep within the council archives, Elder Sira uncovered a set of encrypted files marked with the symbol of the Old Alliance, a symbol that had not been displayed publicly in over 2 centuries. The files referenced a classified operation called Echo Dawn, a final emergency plan designed by human strategists before the Purge. It spoke of Watchers in the Dark and a chosen return. The words made her blood run cold. She knew that if this information reached the public, it could either unite them or destroy the fragile peace they had built far above. The red sky of Xeris shimmered faintly with the movement of distant ships along the outer orbit. At first, they looked like routine transport vessels, but in the darkness between the stars, shadows stirred unnoticed by most. The man in the cell closed his eyes, as if listening to something only he could hear, and whispered softly to himself, "They're coming," shadows above the sky. The following days passed under an uneasy silence that spread across the alien capital like a growing shadow. The streets were busy as usual, the markets still opened, the patrols still walked their routes, but everyone felt it, a strange pressure in the air, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Commander Liora spent sleepless nights pacing along the palace corridors, replaying her conversations with the human in her mind again and again. His calm words, his steady eyes, the way he spoke about the enemy not being truly gone, all of it gnawed at her thoughts like a silent drumbeat. She had sent reports to the council, but most of the elders dismissed her warnings, claiming that humans were known for manipulation and psychological warfare. They believed the man was simply trying to sow fear, yet none of them could explain the genetic proof, none of them could explain the scent, and none of them dared to stand too close to him for long. In the upper control towers of Xeris, the orbital monitors scanned the edges of their star system, a routine operation that had been automated for generations. On this night, however, one of the junior operators noticed something unusual, a faint disturbance in the deep space readings. It was like a ripple across calm water, so faint that it could have been ignored, but the readings repeated again and again, growing stronger each time. When she tried to report it to her superior, he waved it off as equipment malfunction, saying the arrays were old and often glitched. But she had a sinking feeling, a whisper of instinct that told her this was no glitch. Meanwhile, in the deep underground cell, the human sat cross-legged with his back against the cold wall, his eyes half closed, as if listening to something beyond the walls. He didn't speak, didn't move unnecessarily, yet there was a strange sense that he was aware of everything happening above ground. Liora visited him again late at night, unable to stay away. Her footsteps echoed through the empty corridor as the guards stepped aside nervously. She entered his cell and crossed her arms, trying to hide her restlessness. "Something is happening," she said in a low voice. "Our scanners are picking up strange anomalies." The man slowly opened his eyes, and for the first time, there was no faint smile, only seriousness. "They're here earlier than I expected," he said quietly. Leora's heart skipped a beat. "Who's here?" she demanded. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he turned his gaze to the small slit in the wall where a sliver of red sky was visible. "When the shadows start to eat the stars, you'll understand," he said. She frowned, frustrated by his cryptic words, but a part of her mind remembered how calm he had been since the moment of his capture. Not once surprised, not once afraid, as if everything was unfolding exactly as he expected. The next morning, the entire capital woke to an eerie sight. The normally brilliant red sky was darker than usual. The horizon seemed to pulse faintly, and the stars that were usually visible in the day's early light began to blink out one by one. The orbital monitoring towers sent urgent alerts to the Council, reporting massive objects entering their outer orbital range. The Council convened in panic, broadcasting emergency signals to their defense fleets, hoping it was some kind of navigational error, but the data was clear. Dozens of enormous unidentified vessels were entering their space, their patterns precise, their silence absolute. Commander Liora stood on the balcony outside the war room, staring up at the sky as the stars vanished behind invisible giants. She could feel the fear rising from the streets below like a wave. The citizens were gathering in confusion, pointing upward, some falling to their knees, others whispering old legends they were never supposed to remember. The Council demanded explanations from their defense command, But no one had ever encountered ships like these, not in centuries, not since the ancient wars. She rushed down into the prison to confront the human again, her boots echoing sharply against the stone floors. She found him standing for the first time, looking through the slit in the wall with a calm intensity. "You knew this was coming," she said, not as a question but as a statement. He slowly turned toward her, his face illuminated by the dim light. "I told you," he said. "The past doesn't stay buried forever." Liora stepped closer, gripping the iron bars. "What are they? What do they want?" she demanded. His eyes narrowed slightly. "They want what they always wanted," he replied. "And you have no idea how to stop them." His voice was not mocking, but it was cold and certain, like someone who had seen this before. "But I do," he added softly. Her stomach tightened. She had spent her life believing humanity was a myth twisted by fear. Yet here stood a man who spoke of threats that matched their oldest, darkest stories. Above them, the sky darkened even more as the shadow fleet aligned into formation, massive shapes blotting out the sun. The city's alarm systems screamed for the first time in decades, and panic began to spread. The council scrambled to activate ancient planetary defense systems. But most of their technology was untested, their fleets scattered, and their strategies built for smaller conflicts. Not an enemy that operated like a nightmare out of legend. Liora knew deep inside that whatever was coming, their world was not ready. And in the silent darkness of his cell, the human closed his eyes once more and whispered, "And so it begins. Alliance in chains." The capital of Xeris had not seen such chaos in generations. The skies, once glowing with the soft crimson light of their twin suns, were now swallowed by an unnatural darkness that stretched across every horizon. The massive shadow ships hovered above the atmosphere without firing a single shot. Their silence more terrifying than any weapon, citizens flooded the streets, some fleeing toward underground shelters, others gathering in crowds, pointing at the sky and whispering ancient prayers they barely remembered. The sound of alarms echoed through every district, creating a rhythm of fear that matched the racing hearts of millions. Inside the council chamber, panic had replaced reason. The elders shouted over one another, their centuries of knowledge crumbling under the weight of something their history had tried to erase. Commander Liora stormed into the underground prison once again, but this time she was not filled with questions. She was filled with urgency. She found the human standing near the wall, his gaze fixed through the narrow slit as the shadows above the city began to move into a slow but deliberate formation. "Tell me what they are," she demanded. Her voice carried the sharpness of command, but beneath it was a flicker of something else, something closer to desperation. The man turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "They are not what you think," he said calmly. "They are older than your council, older than your cities. And they have returned for what was left unfinished." His tone was steady, as if he had waited a lifetime to say these words. Liora stepped closer to the bars, lowering her voice. "You know how to fight them, don't you?" He didn't answer immediately. He walked closer until the dim light illuminated his face fully. His eyes burned with quiet resolve. "I know what your council has forgotten," he said. "And I know what they fear." Liora clenched her fists. She understood that the council would never trust him, but she also knew deep down that no one on this planet had faced a threat like this before. If the old stories were true, then this man might be the only one who could help them. She made a bold decision, one that could cost her everything. She ordered the guards away, locking the door behind her. The human watched silently as she approached the control panel and began to override the security seals. The heavy cell door hissed as it opened. Releasing a wave of cold air, the man stepped forward slowly, not with the arrogance of a prisoner escaping, but with the calm certainty of someone stepping back into a role he had long prepared for. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Liora met his gaze firmly. "Because I can smell the truth," she said, referencing the scent that had marked him from the beginning. "And because they're coming for all of us." As they moved through the hidden service tunnels beneath the palace, the distant rumble of defense cannons echoed above them. The city's automated shields were activating, but they were ancient, designed for wars against smaller raiding fleets, not an armada from forgotten history. The tunnels were dark and damp, carved centuries ago for emergencies just like this. Though no one had expected to use them again, Liora led the way with determination, while the human walked behind her with silent steps, studying the architecture as if every stone whispered memories to him. When they reached the lower power grid chambers, they found a group of engineers struggling to stabilize the failing shield generators. The sudden appearance of the human caused several of them to panic. Raising tools like weapons, Liora barked at them to stand down, but their eyes were fixed on him with fear and disbelief. He stepped forward, knelt beside a sparking control panel, and without hesitation began rerouting power lines manually. His hands moved with practiced precision, as if he had built these systems himself. Within minutes, the unstable generator stabilized, and the shield's energy signature grew stronger. The engineers stared at him in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how a human could know their ancient systems so well. Liora saw it too, and it shook her. These were not the actions of a stranger. This man understood their world more deeply than most of their own people. "How do you know this?" she asked. Still trying to understand, he didn't look up as he answered, "Because humans helped build it, before your council decided to erase us from your history." His voice carried no bitterness, only truth. As they moved deeper into the city's defense control levels, armed soldiers intercepted them. Their weapons were drawn, their eyes filled with suspicion. The sight of the human walking beside their commander sent ripples of confusion through the ranks. Liora stepped forward and declared that he was under her authority, but the soldiers hesitated. Their training had told them humans were monsters. Yet here he stood, calm, silent, and undeniably real. The moment stretched like a blade's edge, and then the sound of distant explosions shook the ground. The soldiers looked toward the ceiling, fear overtaking their hesitation, and finally lowered their weapons. In that brief moment, something shifted. For the first time since his arrival, the human was no longer just a prisoner. He was a presence moving among them, guiding, stabilizing, commanding without shouting. His eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen this war before. As they emerged into the main defense coordination hall, the room fell into a tense hush. Technicians stared as he approached the ancient central command console, his hands hovering over controls that hadn't been touched in centuries. Liora watched as he began to reactivate subsystems with smooth precision, unlocking protocols that the council didn't even know existed anymore. "Your ancestors buried these tools because they feared what they represented," he said quietly. "But fear doesn't protect, it only delays." And as the alarm lights painted the hall in crimson, the first shockwave from the orbit hit the outer shield layers, sending tremors through the entire city. The war that had been sleeping in their history books was no longer waiting. It had arrived, and the alliance between a single human and a skeptical alien commander was the only thread holding the line together. The storm breaks. The first impact struck the planetary shields with the force of a falling star, sending a deep tremor through the ground that rippled across the capital. Windows shattered, towers swayed, and terrified citizens clung to each other in the streets as the once steady hum of the city was replaced by a deafening wail of sirens. In the command hall beneath the palace, red lights painted every surface in a harsh glow as alarms screamed from all directions. The Shadow Fleet had moved into attack formation, unleashing precise waves of energy bombardment that struck the shields like coordinated blows against ancient armor. The alien defense officers scrambled to interpret the enemy's tactics, but their systems, though advanced in structure, had not been used in real warfare for generations. They were designed for predictable raids, not this kind of relentless, intelligent assault. Commander Liora stood at the center of the chaos, shouting orders, trying to maintain structure among frightened officers. Her mind raced. But deep inside, she knew their defenses were cracking faster than they could adapt. Every explosion above the atmosphere was followed by another tremor. Every tremor by another system failure. The council members, hidden deep in their fortified chambers, bombarded her communication line with panicked questions and contradictory commands. It was clear to her that if she kept following their outdated strategies, The city would fall within hours. The human, who now stood beside the ancient central console, surveyed the unfolding disaster with a calm that contrasted the panic around him. His fingers moved swiftly over controls that none of the alien officers dared to touch, activating layers of forgotten systems buried deep within their infrastructure. Codes in an ancient hybrid language flashed across the screens, confusing the technicians who watched helplessly as the human bypassed security barriers that their civilization had long forgotten. "Your ancestors built these defenses with our help," he said without looking up, "and only we remember how they work. At first, the officers resisted, questioning his authority, but as they watched him reroute power flows, stabilize failing shields, and anticipate incoming bombardments before the scanners even confirmed them, their doubt began to falter. He wasn't guessing, he was remembering. He had seen these patterns before, perhaps in another war, another sky, another century. Commander Liora, standing beside him, matched his urgency, relaying his commands to her officers with firm authority. Her trust in him spread through the room like fire, and slowly the chaotic chatter turned into organized coordination. Outside, the sky burned as beams of energy collided with the outer shield layers, enormous arcs of light stretching across the horizon like cracks in reality. Whole districts lost power as generators overloaded. The city's power grid, built with both alien and human designs centuries ago, had never been pushed to its full capacity, and now it screamed under the weight of war. The human tapped into auxiliary nodes buried beneath the old temple district, reactivating long-sealed reactors. The lights in the control hall flickered, then steadied. As ancient systems roared back to life like sleeping beasts stirred from their slumber, the enemy fleet shifted formation, adjusting to their defenses with frightening precision. Their movements were not random, but calculated. Like a predator testing its prey, "They're probing the weaknesses," the human said, his voice calm but firm. "They always start this way." His eyes narrowed as he studied the tactical map, pointing out weak shield junctions before the enemy even attacked them. Within moments, his predictions came true, and the alien officers stared at him with growing disbelief and awe. Liora turned to him, her voice low but intense. "How do you know their tactics so well?" He met her gaze without hesitation. "Because we fought them before," he said, "and unlike your council, we never forgot." His words carried a heavy truth that settled deep into her chest. The old stories, once dismissed as exaggerated myths, were unfolding before her eyes, and the only person who understood this war stood right beside her. As the battle intensified, the human took partial control of the planetary defense grid, linking old protocols with current systems to form a hybrid command structure. He moved like someone born for this moment, issuing commands with speed and precision that stunned even the most experienced alien officers. Under his direction, defense towers synchronized their fire, shield nodes redistributed energy efficiently, and vulnerable sectors were reinforced before they collapsed. Slowly, the tide began to shift. The Shadow Fleet's first assault wave failed to break through, and for the first time since the attack began, the citizens below looked up not with despair, but with a flicker of hope, but victory was far from certain. The Shadow Fleet changed tactics again, deploying swarms of smaller, faster craft that began targeting shield junction points directly, bypassing the main defenses. Explosions lit up the upper atmosphere like stars being born and dying in rapid succession. The human leaned over the console, eyes sharp. "They're adapting faster than expected," he said. "If we don't push back now, they'll tear us apart piece by piece." His hands flew across the control surface as he rerouted weapon grids to counter the swarm, giving precise firing patterns that alien gunners followed with astonishment. Commander Liora stood beside him like a pillar, her voice commanding the room with renewed strength. She had once doubted him, but now she moved in sync with him, trusting his instincts as if they were her own. Together, they held the line against a storm that should have destroyed them in minutes. Above them, the once dark sky flashed with the light of counterfire as planetary cannons awakened fully, releasing bursts of power that shook the heavens. As the first wave of enemy ships broke off, retreating momentarily to regroup, The control hall erupted in mixed cries of relief and disbelief. Officers stared at the human not as a prisoner, but as a commander, a strategist, a savior out of their forgotten history. Liora looked at him and saw not a legend, but a man standing in the heart of a war he had always known would return. And as distant sensors detected the next wave approaching, even larger than the first, he exhaled slowly and whispered, "This is only the beginning, the return of the scent." The night sky above Xeris was no longer red. It was a battlefield of light and shadow. The second wave of the enemy fleet descended like a tide determined to drown a fragile shore. Their formations spread wide, surrounding the planet in a tightening net. Inside the Planetary Defense Command Hall, the air was thick with heat and tension. Technicians shouted updates, warning signals blared without pause, and the floor trembled under the weight of distant explosions that echoed like thunder rolling across the heavens. The human stood at the ancient console, sweat glistening on his forehead, his eyes locked on the shifting patterns of the enemy. His hands moved with speed born not of panic, but of experience, adjusting defenses, rerouting power, and issuing commands that the alien officers followed with growing trust. Commander Liora stood beside him, her voice carrying strength through the chaos. Every order she gave was backed by the confidence she had found in their unlikely alliance. The soldiers and officers who once doubted now moved as one under their shared command. The planetary defenses, once brittle and disorganized, now moved like a single living organism, shield nodes reinforcing one another, cannons firing in synchronized patterns, fighter squadrons emerging from their bays to intercept the enemy swarm. It was as if an ancient rhythm had been rediscovered, a rhythm buried in their history but alive in their blood. The enemy pushed harder, focusing their attacks on the shield's primary junction point above the capital. Massive energy beams hammered the same location over and over, shaking the shield layers to their core. Generators overloaded, sparks flew, and the lights flickered violently across the command hall. The alien officers panicked, warning that the junction would collapse within minutes. If it fell, the enemy would pour through, turning the capital into ruins. The human leaned closer to the display, his jaw tightening. His mind raced through memories, calculations, and old battle formations. Then suddenly he began issuing rapid commands, directing power flows in a pattern none of the alien engineers recognized. He tapped into a hidden failsafe buried deep within the old human systems, a maneuver designed for a moment exactly like this. The shield junction began to stabilize, the energy flow redistributing through forgotten secondary channels. The engineers gasped as they watched a technology their ancestors had abandoned centuries ago come alive under the hands of the very people they had once erased. Liora stared at the human, realizing that without him, their world would have already fallen. "How did you know this would work?" she asked over the roar of alarms. He looked at her briefly, his eyes steady and full of something that felt like both pain and pride. "Because we built this world together," he said, "and we never stopped watching." Outside, the battle reached its peak. The sky blazed with energy beams and defensive fire, ships exploded in silent flashes of light, and the swarm collided with the planetary defenses like a storm striking ancient cliffs. Under the humans' leadership, the alien fleets adapted faster than they ever had before, pushing back with precision and resilience that shocked their enemy. The tide began to turn, not because of superior weapons, but because of unity forged in the heat of desperation. The scent that had once spread fear through the royal hall now lingered through every corridor and command room as a strange symbol of strength. Officers whispered about it without realizing, instinctively recognizing it as the same scent their ancestors spoke of when humans fought beside them in ages past. After hours of relentless combat, the Shadow Fleet finally began to retreat. Their formations broke apart, vanishing into the darkness of space as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind burning wreckage and silent debris fields orbiting the planet. The alarms quieted, the trembling ground steadied, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, a stillness settled over Xeris in the command hall. Exhausted officers collapsed into their chairs, some crying, others laughing in disbelief. The city had survived, not because of their council's guidance, but because a single human had returned and remembered what they had forgotten. Liora stood at the balcony overlooking the ruined skyline, the faint light of dawn breaking through the clouds of smoke and ash. Below, citizens emerged cautiously from their shelters, their faces turning upward, whispering stories already forming into legend. The scent carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable, reaching every corner of the city like a reminder of something ancient that had awakened. She turned to look at the human standing silently behind her. His clothes were scorched, his hands marked with the stains of battle, but his presence was unwavering. "You changed everything," she said quietly. He shook his head slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon. "No," he replied. "I only reminded you of what you once were." His voice carried a mix of sorrow and pride, a sound that felt older than the city itself. As the council finally emerged from their shelters, their once unshakable authority shaken to its core, they approached him with caution, unsure how to address the living proof of their forgotten history. The people, however, needed no instructions. Word spread like fire, and within hours, crowds gathered in the streets, chanting stories about the scent-bearer, the watcher, the last human. The man who had walked into their city in chains now stood as a figure whose very existence had changed the course of their future. In that moment, the scent that had once made Liora tremble in fear became something entirely different. It became the scent of hope, of remembrance, of a bond that had been broken and reforged in the fires of war. As the wind carried it through the ruined towers and battered streets, the people of Xeris lifted their heads to the sky and whispered words not spoken in centuries. Words of unity, strength, and shared destiny. And as the human stood quietly, looking at the rising sun, his eyes reflected both the weight of the past and the promise of what was to come. He had not returned to conquer, he had returned to remind them, to stand with them, to awaken a legacy buried beneath fear and silence. The war was not over, but neither was the story, and for the first time in generations, the stars above Xeris did not seem distant or cold. They seemed alive, watching. As the scent of humanity returned to the galaxy once more,